really sure if this is like a beginner making an offer, but sometimes it's good to go back to basics and just,
Exactly.
you know,
It's designed to be, well, it's the first time I'm teaching it. So my theory is that it's designed to be really, if you are new, it's going to provide some refresher, practical clarity after having taken your course and not actually having a human being involved in the transaction. And if you are, we'll say, more seasoned, then a refresher of maybe some best practices that you don't know, or that you have stopped doing. Right?
yes,
So that's sort of the idea.
get rid of
So
bad habits.
yes, they're so much harder to get rid of them than it is to start them. I'm just going to clean my glasses here, guys, because I cannot see anything. And if apparently I'm the only one with video at the moment is what I'm seeing. So we're going to be switching over to my screen for most of it anyway. So I'll probably turn the video off because it's not going to be pertinent to what we're doing. In terms of my face, because it's going to be, I'm going to share the agenda with you guys, and then I'm going to be sharing web forms. So that's going to be important. Okay, so we are 10:03, so I think we will get going. And the idea will be that as we go, I'll be taking regular stops to ask questions. And then if there's something I haven't covered, then we will get to that before we wrap up. I'll make sure that there's time for questions and answers. Does that work for everybody? I'm going to make sure I have my chat open over here as well, so that if there is somebody does have a question, you can also type it in the chat, and then we can address it and or make sure we get to it. Okie dokie. So on that note, I'm going to share my screen. Try not to have heart failure over how many tabs I have open. And I'm going to switch that. Okay. So now let's look at this a little bit bigger. Okay. So can everybody see my screen? Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, perfect. I'm just going to make sure I've got people on mute just so I don't get background noise, not because I don't want to hear you. So you can unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay. Okay, so the idea behind this, as I mentioned, is really to sort of get us back on track with best practices if we're already out and about writing offers, and if we're new to writing offers, like, oh my goodness, what do I need to do? So let's start with the basics. So what do I need to do to prepare? Okay, so one of the first things that this course is structured primarily with a slant towards you being in a client relationship versus a customer relationship. So every once in a while, I might have to correct to make sure that you don't do something if it's customer oriented, but 98% of your offers are going to be that you're writing for actual clients versus customers. Okay. So on that note, the first thing is that when we have a client who wishes to purchase a property, we should be doing the equivalent of a CMA on that property. We need to be verifying what would be a recommended price, what's the history of the home, is this the right offer price for your client. Now, this is all assuming that you're not in the middle of a bidding war. If you're in a bidding war, you're still going to have to research, but you're going to be researching what is the maximum that you would be recommending to your client that they pay for a property. Meaning, if they were going to go to asking or go over asking, would they be in a position that if they had to resell that home in 3 years, etc., that they would be they wouldn't be financially upside down because they got caught up in the whole hoopla of a bidding war. Does that make sense to you guys? Does anybody have any questions on what I'm talking about there?
No, I think it's important to say, if you think they're bidding really high, that I can't promise you that you're going to get your money back.
Correct.
But if you really want the house, then.
Right. There's always that what is the house worth to you element, which is different than what the resale value is. But let's assume you're in like a regular normal market. Well, even I can give you a recent example. I was talking to my team about this yesterday. Lynette's on the call, so she'll be like, okay, I already heard this once already, but she doesn't have video on, so she can pretend she's smiling and nodding at me. And so, you know, we had a client who was very interested in a particular property, and we went to look at it. And when we first got in there, we thought, oh yeah, this doesn't seem like it's priced wrong. But then when we went back, because the client was considering writing an offer and did the research, realized this person is absolutely playing the market, and they are probably $20,000 overpriced and this is an under $300,000 house, and therefore that home cannot absorb that kind of overpayment. So we had that conversation with the client, and the client made their own decision that it wasn't the house, like it wasn't worth going to there because their time frame was shorter. The point being, it doesn't matter how long you've been in the market, it doesn't matter how long you've been in the industry. I've been doing this for almost 17 years, and I still need to make sure that I check for a client. And part of it is your fiduciary duty to your principal to make sure that you have done everything that you're supposed to do to guide them and give them that right advice. Okay, so you want to be checking and researching the value. The next thing you want to be doing is looking up the property online before you offer. Does everybody know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about looking up the property online?
Yes.
Okay, so I got one yes. So we're going to assume that it's a
Yes.
that it's a collective yes for everybody.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm just going to quickly show going into property online and the types of things that I would suggest that we look at, right? Just to give you an example. And one moment, please. Okay, so whenever I do a course like this, I always use my own real estate versus looking up some random human. So this is one of the properties that I own. So if I look up the address, so this will be a good one. It'll be a quick refresher for anyone on property online. So what does anybody notice about this first thing now that if you came to meet me about selling this house, what is the first thing that you notice?
Who are John and Lynette Snowball?
That's an excellent question, Lynette. It's almost like I prepped you, which I did not, but this is excellent. So the first thing would be, there's two things wrong. Number one, they spelled my name wrong. Number two, again, who are John and Lynette? So in this particular case, these were my parents. They are deceased. So if I was preparing an offer and on the listing cut, I'm the buyer's agent, I only see Elizabeth Ann De Silva because I have a joint tenancy, and so therefore I own the property. This was done for matrimonial issues, etc. But if I was writing an offer and I didn't check this, how do I actually know these people are not alive as the buyer's agent? I have absolutely no idea. So as an agent, I need to check. And that would be a question that I would need to ask the seller's agent to say, okay, well, you know, I'm preparing an offer. I just want to ask, I was checking on property online and there's these other two people that are not listed on the listing cut. And that's where the explanation needs to come in to say, oh, well, they're actually deceased. You know, this person has ownership of the property, or, oh, I've had it happen where the seller's agent's gone, oh, really? I didn't realize there was somebody else on title. So that's a whole different conversation. We're not going to do that right now. But the concept being, so that's the first thing you want to check. You would check to also see what is the size of the property. Is that consistent with what you are seeing in the listing cut? Then you're going to click on the details, pardon me, and you're going to go through, you can look at the deed, you can see whether or not there are restrictive covenants, etc. So I can also see there are separate restrictive covenants. They are separately recorded. They're not always recorded, so I can check for those as well. We can see that there's an easement across the property. We might want to check that before we go. Then I can also see the mortgage and to see that there is a mortgage, okay? So when we're going through there, you're getting a feel of what's happening. You're looking to see that there's not anything else recorded against here. But the first red flag as the buyer's agent is making sure that you are checking that the people are there, the names are spelled correctly, and who are you writing this offer to, okay? Everybody good with that?
I don't want to get on a sensitive issue because it's your own property, but at what point would your parents be taken off that?
We actually are going to be doing it soon, and it's mainly just because now that my mother has passed, right? I have sort of two humans, but technically I wouldn't really have to do it until I sold the property and the deed got transferred.
Okay.
Because there's kind of no reason to spend the money to have the deed re-registered and change documents with the bank and all that for no reason because of the right of survivorship.
Okay, so they can stay on until it's sold, and that would be taken care of by the lawyer at that time.
Now, if I, okay, just to scroll off for 1 second, and this is like a mortgage course. If I was renewing my mortgage in a way that I needed to be, if it wasn't an auto renewal that I was doing on the mortgage, and if I needed to be pre-approved on the type of mortgage, like if I wanted to shop my mortgage, then it would have to come off at that point because then title would be getting changed. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
if right now you saw my mortgage with RBC, if I said, no, I'm going to go to TD or something and start a whole new mortgage, well, at that point it would get cleared up.
Yeah.
Right. So obviously I've had to verify with the bank on the renewal of mortgage that I'm the only one signing and here's the appropriate paperwork and et cetera, et cetera. So you want to check property online, and you're checking again to make sure that the people on the offer match what's on the listing cut. And if not, then you need to have that conversation so that you're not writing a deal to the wrong people or to not enough people. There's a lot of properties where parents have co-signed, et cetera. And if they're untitled, then they need to sign that offer. So that's very important to make sure to be prepared to write a valid offer, that you've checked all of the different sources.
And I
Go
don't want,
forward.
as you
So
say,
we also did the agency court. Yes.
I don't,
Sorry,
I don't want
you cut out there.
as you say, squirrel off, but sometimes there's only one person on. So I have one right now, and it's the lady, the wife's name that's on the property. However, they've been in the property for 21 years. They've been married for 45. So there was a little bit of argument on the husband's part why he had to sign.
He doesn't have to.
Oh dear. I told him he has to. It's matrimonial home.
Okay, so it's the opposite. Under matrimony, it's deemed to have matrimonial consent. Now, let me go back. As a best practice, I would definitely want the party to sign as a best practice. But technically, the person who owns it, the other person still has the rights under the property, under the Matrimonial Act. And so therefore, if they objected to having the other person, if the other spouse was in theory trying to sell the house out from underneath them, it would be stopped under the Matrimonial Act. That's why it's better to have both signatures, but technically you don't have to.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. It's a best practice to always have both people that are affected by the sale of the property to sign, but legally you do not require the second person.
I had one years ago where the wife was selling the property and the husband lived out west. And she wanted to sell it herself.
So that would be a red flag to me.
Yeah.
Because you're not sitting with both humans where you've actually received consent.
Mm-hmm. I got them both to sign.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
It's never wrong to have extra signatures. How about that? But it's not legally required. Make sense? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. So going back to where we were, of course, because you're all our agency experts now that we've taken our agency course, we are going to, obviously, we already have our agency documents completely filled out, correct, and signed, obviously, right? So it is important because it matters how you go forward with your with knowing, sorry, what type of advice you're able to give. That's why that agency document absolutely has to be done before you prepare an offer. You cannot proceed any further to write that offer until that's going forward. So when we're looking at chatting with a seller's agent, so once you have your instructions from your clients and you're getting ready to draft the offer, then you would want to have a conversation with that seller's agent before you necessarily get that offer drafted. If you call them and you want to let them know that you're going to be bringing an offer shortly, and you're doing that because you're also trying to find out if there are any other offers in play. What is your timing, right? What is the time and ability of the person to present? One of the things that will happen to you, specifically as a seller's agent, is you will have agents who offers just show up in your email. You had literally no idea it was coming. You're not available. Your clients aren't available. They've put this ridiculous 2-hour turnaround time on a Friday night at 9 p.m. or something, right? And your client's a shift worker, or they're in bed, or you're at an event and you're drinking wine, so you can't do, like, you need to have a conversation with the other agent, right? It's not to say there's not going to be times where it's going to be inconvenient and frustrating that you feel rushed, but generally speaking, having a conversation and starting the negotiation with the conversation about, so I've just let you know, I'm very excited. We're going to be bringing you an offer. What's the best email to reach you at? Are there any offers in play? We're hoping to get this resolved this evening, because you have to remember, if they counter, the time doesn't matter anyway. So starting off with a hammer to their head is usually not an ideal scenario on how to do great negotiation. And I would always recommend that you ask if there is a preferred closing date for the seller, unless it's written in the listing cut, which it very rarely is. And 99.9% of the time it's going to say negotiable, which is not helpful. Because if you have clients of your own if your clients have a very specific timeline, you want to get an idea from the other side, if that's even in the realm of possibility. It can also give you some direction on how to advise your clients, because price often weighs itself out in a pretty balanced way against closing date, because sellers really want their timing to line up. And so sometimes if you're able to accommodate the closing date of a seller, you have more leverage from a negotiation standpoint. So having that conversation first is very important, so that you're not dying on a hill over dates when you really want to die on a hill over price. Okay. Does that make sense? Anybody have any comments, questions on that before I move on? Nope. Seeing none, I'm going to go on. Okay.
Sorry, Anne. I
That's
just
okay.
come across a situation actually I met before. So, like in a very in winter, there's like storm something, and you write offer, say like maybe within 4 hours, and the seller should reply, but the seller's agent got the offer and say, well, because it's the weather problem, the bad weather, and I can't get the seller to talk about this offer in these hours. So is it okay to like just verbally like extend the response hour?
Oh, that's an excellent question. No, the answer is no.
Okay.
You need to have your clients change the time on the page 3 and initial it, and then you would send a new page 3 over. Okay.
Oh, I mean, if I am a buyer's agent and the seller's agent tell me like they can't get the,
you still have to change your offer, because it's going to die. It dies.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, but the other thing too is that's where you also want to have a conversation with the other agent to say, I'm like, unless these people are, and this is going to be a really weird sentence, unless your client, the seller's clients, are absolutely technologically not accessible, I don't understand why anybody can't speak to anybody in 4 hours and do e-signatures. If the clients do not have, you're going to have the very odd situation where somebody does not have email and they have to drive out to see them and they have to do hand signatures. But I would respectfully say that that is an extremely small percentage of the time. And that as long as the time is not so late, the biggest issue is people doing things too late in the evening, and people, they're exhausted. They're not prepared to make a big decision at that time. They go to bed early, or they're working shift work. Those are the times we need to be more flexible. But we also have to remember that you can put whatever time you want If that person is going to counter it, they can do that whenever they want. So it doesn't matter what time you put on it. So part of that in terms of preparing and drafting the offer is preparing your clients for the process about how it's actually going to go. We're going to write the offer. This is the time we're going to leave it open until. If they're going to accept the offer, they need to accept it by that time. If they're going to counter, then they will advise us of when we will receive the counter. It could be that it's inside that time frame, but it can be later, right? So that conversation is extremely important. So I just have a comment from Mike. New agents tend to think that telling the best closing date is breaking the rules and you can't pry it out of them. Suggestions. Not sure if you can hear me. The Zoom doesn't seem to recognize your mic. No, I did not. If you spoke, I'm so sorry. I personally didn't hear you. I don't know if anybody else did. And so the answer to your question, Mike, is that you can only disclose things, period, if you have a lawful instruction from your seller. So if your seller has instructed you to discuss what is the best and most appropriate closing date in order to facilitate negotiation, then that is a lawful instruction and you can absolutely communicate that, okay? Basically you're saying, we'd like it to be, later than May 30th or, sometime before X, those are generally, it's not that you're specifically saying June 15th would be our perfect date. It's usually a range or a before or after type thing that most people are told. So first I'll just go back to Iris, make sure, did I answer your question, Iris?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I just muted my speaker. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. I just want to make sure that I didn't just move on too quickly. I apologize. And then the other, so for Mike, I think that's a really good point, and it's having that conversation because date is really important. It's one of the big pieces in writing your offer. Okay, so having that conversation with the other agent is a really important step in preparing a quality offer, but it's also an important step in the dialogue that you're going to have with that agent to do your negotiation. And just as an aside with respect to negotiation, because it's not physically connected to preparing the offer, but it is relevant, it is very, very important that you remember that you are not against the seller's agent. You have a willing buyer and they have a willing seller, and it's your job to work together to find a resolution and find a deal that will work together. You are not against the seller's agent. If the two of you don't work together, you're not going to have a deal. So the mindset and the methodology with which you approach this transaction will make a big difference in how the deal goes all the way through, right through closing, including inspection. So it's just a mindset thing that your agent on the other side is a peer with whom you are working to create a transaction. And they are not actually the enemy. They are the person who controls the product you want. So we need to be mindful of how we're approaching these deals, okay? So when we're talking about drafting the actual offer, what are some of the best practices in your agreement of purchase and sale? What dates should you be using? What are the standard inclusions that we would recommend in chattels? What do you put in 3.1 or 3.3, which is the new construction one? Those are the seller's obligations. And what do I put in 4.1 for buyer's obligations? So we're going to just quickly look at a draft open agreement of purchase and sale and take a peek. We are going to please wait, apparently is what we're going to do right now. There we go. Okay, so let's do a draft transaction. So then you can import your data. I'm not intending to do a web forms course. Let me just, I'm just going to pull up a property that I had looked at the other day online. Doesn't make any difference what property it is. So when you add the MLS number, it's going to pull the info for you, which will save you on data entry. I have too many things open here. Oh my gosh, now my computer's decided to slow itself right down. So I'm going to go to forms. I'm going to add a form. And I'm going to add my agreement of purchase and sale. So, ta-da, can everybody see? So the first thing that we want to make sure is when we're looking at our best practices, one of the big things is that we want to be consistent. And one of the big things is making sure, obviously, we have everything filled in so that we're fully complete. If this particular house is on city services, municipal water, municipal sewer, so there's unlikely that I'm going to be attaching any of these other documents that would change my page number. So we'll start with 3. We'll make our so here, let's just talk about the where. So I have my buyer designated filled out and signed with this client already. And so I have my client's full address on that. I personally recommend that you do not put the home address as a best practice of your person that carries over from the buyer designated, and that I would just put Halifax. Why? Anybody tell me why I'm doing that as a best practice?
You probably don't want me to answer that question, do you, Anne?
Go ahead, Tammy.
I personally do not put the address on there for privacy reasons. And one of them is, let's say that my buyer was from Victoria. People may think that they have more money than what they may possibly have and form opinions is my personal reason. One thing I do want to say, I just recently had a company come back and say that their broker require that the address be filled in. And I just emailed back and said, it's not a requirement. And I purposefully did not put their address in.
Right. So you generally have to put, you do have to put a geographic region usually,
Yes.
or, and mainly it has to do with the buyer wants to know, or sorry, the seller wants to know if the person is local, they're looking to find out if their money is in Canada. And so that's one of the reasons why if someone is from out of country, I don't care which country, they're looking to know, because it is more complicated with respect to financing. So that is relevant information to the seller, but I don't really want them to be able to look up the address to figure out how much their house is worth, looking up their assessment, seeing if they rent or don't rent, like, you know, are they getting divorced? Like there's a bunch of different things that can come from this information that I don't think is relevant in the, that I don't think is relevant in the negotiation. So then the next piece is going to be having personally viewed or not personally viewed the property. And that would be coming from the conversations we've had, for example, about COVID, for example. So if you've shown it to them by video and they're going to then view the property later in person, you would be saying that they have not viewed the property, and you would be adding a clause later to qualify that, or to quantify that they're going to view it in person later and be satisfied, etc. So in most cases, you're going to be ticking that they have personally viewed it. It's extremely rare in terms of the amount of deals you're going to write in your career that they haven't seen the property. Then you're going to have the names of the sellers. You're going to have the property, postal code, etc. We do want this part filled out in quite a bit of detail versus what we need up here. And that's because we're trying to make sure that we're purchasing the correct property. The PID number, the county. HRM is not a county. As a reminder for all of our local people, we often see HRM come in. That's not an actual county. That is a region, which is not the same thing. So we're going to put in our purchase price. I'm just going to put anything here because it doesn't make any difference for our purposes. So we'll say 250,000. So when it comes to your deposit, so let's say I'm putting $2,500 down. When am I going to do that? So now deposit is a very interesting question. As a buyer's agent, I want the deposit to go as late as possible. Unless I'm in a, I'm in a fight, then I want my deposit quick and I want it big because I'm trying to show strength of offer. If I'm in a regular deal where I've negotiated back and forth and there's no panic and people aren't beating each other over the head with a stick to get at this property, then I'm going to do a normal size deposit, which is usually about The standard is approximately 1% of the asking price, but that's just a guide. It's certainly not a rule. And as a buyer's agent, I'm going to want the deposit to go towards the end of my conditions so that if I want to get out of the deal, I'm not waiting for a check to come back. But as a seller's agent, I don't like that. I want the money in. I want some skin in the game. And so that's a conversation, you know, for you to have with your buyers as to what they want to do. Most buyers, you've already prepared them that they're going to be putting a deposit. So let's say, for example, today's the 30th. I'll put that deposit is due Monday. And where am I going to put it? So this particular listing happens to be with Century 21. So I'm going to just tell you a pet peeve that I have, and there's nothing technically wrong with it. It just drives me crazy. So most people write, a lot of people here write this. Well, they spell it properly, in trust. But it says right here, in trust. So it's Century 21 Trident Realty in trust, drives all of the brokers crazy when they're reviewing files. And it's just a pet peeve. It's not wrong. It just, I don't know, just makes us crazy. Any questions so far on anything that I've said? Okay, moving on. So then we're gonna have our closing date. And of course, please remember that your closing date cannot be on a holiday or it cannot be on a weekend. You might be working weekends, but your lawyers and the registry of deed are not. So I'm going to pick June 4th just as a random date. So I want to talk to you about days of the week if we're talking about best practices and how you proceed. It is our recommendation as brokers that you do not do all of your closings on Fridays. And the reason being is if there's a delay in funding that deal and the money doesn't come in by about 4 o'clock on that Friday afternoon, it is possible that nobody is getting keys until Monday. So as the buyer's agent, your ideal scenario, even as a seller's agent, is not to have closings on Fridays because of that problem, unless they're paying cash or, you know, they're with a particular, like sometimes certain banks are faster, but that's sort of the ideal of the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because if there's a problem with the funding and it doesn't come in by that 5 p.m. timeline to get it over to the other side, it'll close the very next day once the money is moved. This avoids weekends and avoids any per diems that could be owed as a buyer if the money doesn't come through in time, that now you've had to pay for storage for the sellers or you're putting them up in a hotel or something because of a delay caused by you. So that's a best practice. Obviously, we also recommend that you do not do it on the Friday or a Tuesday immediately following a long weekend for exactly the same reason. It's just a systemic delay that can be done. And also please avoid the last 2 days of June at all costs if possible. There, it's craziness. Any questions on closing date recommendations? Nope. Okay. So with respect to how you're completing this particular section on closing, it already says that it's going to be vacant. So you might put, you know, broom clean. Oops. You might have put instead, you wouldn't have one or you wouldn't have both of these on. So you might have professionally cleaned and receipt. Oh my gosh, it's like people watching you type, and receipt to be provided on closing. So this is basically saying we want cleaners and we want proof. And you typically only ask for this as a best practice when the house is legitimately filthy and you have absolutely no confidence that the house will be even broom clean without bringing in professional cleaners to deal with it. We always recommend a 9 a.m. time for pre-close inspection. And it's very important that you advise your buyers that they are not getting their keys at 9 a.m. That is when we would have the right to view the property. And at some point that day, it could be potentially, you know, 5 p.m. that day. So no moving trucks, no hookups for cable or internet or delivery of furniture. Nothing can happen on that closing date. It all has to be booked for the next day. And that is about understanding your timelines as a best practice on how to prepare a buyer for closing. So Mike just asked a question that says, today with COVID-19, can you ask for sterilization? I would honestly say that that would be deemed in most cases unreasonable. If the clients have been in self-quarantine, they would have to be out of the home for 3 days before closing. because it is determined that the virus will not live longer than 3 days, and that is the advice of lawyers on this particular circumstance. So if you were aware that these clients were, for any reason requiring to self-isolate, then that would be the requirement. As far as sterilization, we have no indication of that, Mike, as coming as a practice or a recommendation. I don't know even who you would hire. We have no concept of what the cost would be. I don't even know. I don't have a good answer for you. I've not had a single person ask for that or call me about asking for that. But certainly it was always the client's right to ask for something, but you would have to have researched it first as a buyer's agent to be able to provide a solution or have some sense of cost of what are you asking for from that seller. And I would also say, from a reasonableness standard, unless those people have been exposed, I don't know how you'd get it, right? If the home was cleaned, like if it was properly cleaned, and the person is using, disinfectants, proper bleach disinfectants to clean surfaces, most people would argue that that's probably enough, but it's a decision. If the buyer doesn't ask for it, I don't know that I would be offering it, right? And if I'm a buyer, if I'm asking for it, I better be prepared for what that financial implication is that I am asking of that seller. If it's going to be $1,500 to bring in some kind of special crew with hazmat suits to disinfect, as a seller's agent, I might tell you to go jump in the harbor, because I'm not going to take on that cost when I can have the surfaces cleaned. Does that make sense to you guys? I realize that's not a specific answer for you, Mike, but it's the best one I've got. So when we're going through, of course, I'm not explaining the agreement of purchase and sale to you guys right now. That's not the purpose. It's best practices. So 99% of the time, you're going to have warranty deed as your main form of deed. If it is a mini home, it's going to be general conveyance or bill of sale, unless if it's in a park, if it's on land, then it's warranty. Obviously, if it's an estate, it's warranty. It's a estate deed. If it is a foreclosure, it's going to be a quit claim deed, and or whatever instructions are put in the information. What kind of information you have from the schedules from a foreclosure. So just going back to Mike's comment here, just meant wipe down stuff with a cleaner. I think you would have to be more specific. I think the word sterilization, Mike, is very literal in terms of what his expectation is versus asking that all things be cleaned with a bleach surface or bleach wipe or something. I think that's a very different question. So obviously you want to have your offer date in. They have fixed the form on most of the forms where it auto-populates the 2020. There is the odd form where it doesn't still do that. So you're going to have to add the text of the 20 in your document signature program. So going back to our list here, standard inclusions and what date should I use? What inclusions? What do I put in 3.1 and 4.1? I just want to make sure you guys see that we are actually tracking based on the agenda. So when it comes to the seller's obligations, a recommendation for a best practice is if I go back to my deposit date, I had put the 4th of May. It is typically the best recommendation that your deposit date and your seller's date for 3 and 3.1 match. And the reason that I suggest that is that you then have this one first date where you are exchanging things with the other side. You are giving them money and they are giving you documentation as well. So it's very simple to remember. The more dates you add, the more mistakes you will make. It's very important to keep your dates very simple. So let's assuming it's a normal property. I'm going to want my property disclosure, any restrictive covenants. So now, if you recall from when we looked at property online, you can look to see whether or not there are restrictive covenants. They're either going to be listed separately as a line item, or they are not listed and they are attached in the last final pages of the deed. So you should check. If you have already found them, then you don't need to tick it in this section. So let's say I looked it up on property online like I'm supposed to, and I have found the restrictive covenants. I can potentially not tick it, but I would still put it down here because I want to make sure that my client is satisfied that there are no rules regarding the property or the enjoyment of the property that would affect them. So I'm going to tick both, just assuming they're not on property online and I want to be 100% sure. let's just say we saw that there was a propane tank with the property, but there's nothing attached to be provided for me to sign now. Location certificate, what's important for this for our clients is that they understand that this is if they have one. So that's why the if available is there. If they don't have one, they don't have one. And whatever it is, it's a location certificate is only certified for the exact date it was prepared. So it's designed to give them some idea of the boundaries of the property. But if they want a completely accurate one, then they would need to hire a surveyor to do them a location certificate after they own the property.
So the location certificate, should it be transferred?
It's not transferable. It's not transferable.
Oh, okay.
It is a fixed piece of paper that represents that house on the date that the location certificate was done, period.
Okay.
So if you get it, it's for information purposes only. If you do not receive one, the compliance team at KW, you will have to, if you don't submit one, then we're going to ask you to verify whether or not you received it or not. And an email is sufficient because it is if available. And if you did receive one, then we should have it. Okay, and that's best practices. So under other things you should be asking for, we do recommend that you ask for the current tax bill. And with respect to the current tax bill, anyone who's taken different courses with me before is aware that the taxes are going to change for your consumer after they buy the house because the cap is going to come off. However, their lender, if they're doing a mortgage, is going to want the current tax bill because they still use it in the approval process. And you could, for example, want 12 months heat and power costs. There could be something else, but these are your standard. What I'm showing you today is the average, everyday, regular purchase, okay? So my dates match for my seller's obligations and my deposit. That's the day that I'm going to exchange documents. Then my buyer's conditions, normally we would tell you 7 to 10 business days. We are currently in a climate where we do require a little bit more time as a result of COVID. And that is simply because some of the processes are taking a little bit longer. Not all the inspectors are working. Banks are a little bit slower. So in this particular case, I'm going to do 2 weeks. I am going to make my deal subject to approving the property disclosure, the restrictive covenants, this propane tank we know about, financing, inspections. So please note, you do not need to add a note under other to say sewer inspection, electrician, anything, radon. You don't need to write any of that. Property inspection means any and all property inspections that you choose to do. If this was a well and septic, that would automatically be covered because we'd have attached it up here. So
Yeah.
moving on. Yeah.
I have a question. So in number 3, you're asking for restrictive covenants and equipment and location certificate. Can the seller just write a counter offer, not countered price, but just there are no restrictive covenants, there's no rented equipment, and no surveyor location?
Absolutely. Those should be covered in a counter, absolutely, because if not, you're going to have to amend them out. We're going to come after you guys to find, because we'll be looking for the paper that you've compelled. What's really important is you're compelling these documents. So if they cannot be provided, it may be that they think they have them and then later they don't, then it would get amended out. If they know right away, then you can counter on procedure.
Okay.
Great question. Thank you, Marianne. So, you know, your insurance is very important, and your insurance clause is one of the ones that I think is people are the most lax about, that you have to have that verified prior to the releasing of conditions, because if the insurance is not in place, there will be no mortgage. It's extremely important. So it's very rare that the tax bill and the power are needed to be a buyer condition. The taxes are what the taxes are. You can put that they're there. 12 months heat and power, same thing. It's all designed on personal use. You know, you would have lots of reasons, but if you want to be able to get out on those 2 clauses, then you would move them forward and copy so that you have all of the same provisions. Okay. We're going to go through in 99% of resale properties, there's no HST. We'll just assume there's none for this. So let's talk about fixtures and chattels. So this is that everything that I saw that was nailed down, bolted in, screwed into that house as of today's date stays. The things that belong to the seller that I want to take and that we want to have possession. So let's say fridge, stove, washer, dryer. Helps if I click properly. And let's say there's a
I have another
washer. Yeah.
What if they didn't view it? What do they put down in 6 point at the bottom?
Okay,
It's-
so what you would do then is you would keep the clause, you would strike out the date portion of this clause, and under 7, under additional provisions, I would put re 6.1, the fixtures, oh my God, and chattels, oh my gosh, I cannot spell today, are to be as advertised on the MLS view or whatever, like as of, as of April. Oh my goodness, I really can't type, people, I promise. Right? So you're just sort of tying it to there to give some answer. So you don't strike out the clause, because if you strike out the clause, you're saying that the fixtures don't have to remain. You're just striking out the date and putting initials in the margin.
So, not fill
You're
in?
cutting out. You're cutting out.
I'm not sure why. Would you not just not fill in a date? I'm always curious about that.
You can't have an empty spot on a form.
So you put it in, then scratch it out. Okay.
No, you don't put a date in. There would be no date here. There would be a line in your e-signature program.
Oh, yes.
Right. Or you could put NA, right? And then you're specifying over here.
Okay.
You
Fine.
can't have an empty hole on a file, on a paper. No empty holes, except additional provisions. As I say that, that's the only empty hole you're allowed to have. So I'm going to take this out because this is not your standard, okay? So the other things that we also want to include are things like, this is one you'll learn always the hard way. Bathroom mirrors. 99% of bathroom mirrors now are not the kind from the builder with those little clips on them. If you guys know what I'm talking about, it's like a flat piece of glass with those 4 clips. That's not what most bathroom mirrors look like now. People have really nice mirrors from like Winners and IKEA and whatever. They're just hanging on a hook. They're not a fixture. It's like a painting. So if you don't add them, you're going to walk in and there are going to be none. There's a garage door, I want the garage door opener. I'm going to also want attached shelving. Then there's going to be the other things, right? So there's a question about a shed. We're going to come back to that in a second. The other thing that we would also suggest, it might be like, heat pump remotes, fireplace. Oh my goodness. Fireplace tools, any remaining firewood, like what are the things that the client is expecting? One of the big ones is window treatments and hardware. This is where a vague word is extremely important, and I will recommend these very specific words: window treatments and hardware. If you just put blinds or curtains, they can take them off the walls and fold them up and put them on the kitchen counter and take all the rods and leave holes in your wall because you didn't ask for the rods, right? The word window treatments implies everything that is somehow attached to a window and all of the gear that goes with it, okay? So these are some of the standard type things. If there's a pool, you want pool equipment, if it's central vac and attachments, so that they're not just leaving the canister and walking away with the broom head. You need to be very specific. And if you have more things than fit in here, you would say here, for example, or on an additional schedule, you would say re 6.2, the following items, to be added to this clause and are subject to the terms therein. Pool, equipment, blah, 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 blah. So why, does anybody know why I'm adding this wording with respect to not just saying, and I want the pool table, and I want the bar stools, just listing them separately? Why have I added this beginning part?
Well, it does say in working order and free from encumbrances, and you'd need to have that.
Marianne, if I had a prize, you would win it. Because what happens is people put like, you know, major things just listed. Well, they're just listed. They can be broken. You haven't tied it back to the same clause. You need to extend the clause to include these items. So that's very important. So question about a shed. If there's a shed that is going to be removed, then you would be stating in here, for example, so if the shed was leaving, let's say we've got the sellers. And so these are specific questions that you would reach out to us on a particular time, but I'll just do it quickly for you. The sellers to have the shed removed in a professional manner. I can't type today. And any landscaping, I can't spell again, repairs, you know, to be made at their expense, if any, by no later than June. So I want it done before closing, so I'm not getting there and there's dragging crap and ruin the lawn. So, you know, you always have to think of, if somebody removes something, if they're like, well, we're going to take that TV bracket. Okay, well then I need the wall patched and painted if you're going to do that. You're not just going to leave these giant holes in the wall. So your job as a buyer's agent is to be trying to mitigate everything that could happen when you show up on closing and your clients are expecting to get their keys and walk into this spectacular house, and now there's holes in the wall and the shed's gone and there's a big freaking track mark where they dragged it out of the backyard and ruined the lawn. You have to be ahead of these things. As yes,
with questions, but I do have a question. What about a pool that needs to be inspected and it's winter?
You are basically SOL. I realize that's not the answer that you want. You can try to build in a provision for a holdback, but you have to be prepared for your buyer that there's not really a way to guarantee. The only way to guarantee it is to build in a warranty clause to the agreement, which I would structure with you or one of the broker team, to have that survive the closing, that the seller warrants that it was in good working order, et cetera, and failing which, you know, you have the right to sue them, et cetera. That's all you can do. Clear like mud? Okay, perfect, moving on. So, and then we have our lawyer review clause. So best practices, this lawyer review clause should absolutely 100% should always match your buyer condition date. This lawyer review date should never be earlier than the buyer condition date. Does anybody know why? Other than Tammy.
Because you have to have all your documents in to give to the lawyer to review.
No, yes and no. It would be, for example, if my inspection clause is still open and I want to have my inspection amendment reviewed by my lawyer and have my lawyer be able to determine whether or not we can come to terms based on wording and terminology, having my lawyer review clause open till that last date gives me 100% ability to always be going back to my lawyer all the way through the deal. But ultimately, what it actually comes down to is that our job, our fiduciary duty, is to protect our buyers. And the number one ally we have in protecting a buyer all the way through the transaction is our lawyer, because we are a team with the client to represent that client. And so having the ability to tag in the lawyer for anything that is going on in that transaction and have it just be that it's the lawyer has determined that this has just become a complete nightmare, and be able to guide you on transactions and clauses, et cetera, is extremely important. So that lawyer review clause should always match your end date. So property migration, you will have this box ticked in most cases. It may not be, but if not, that's fine. If you are selling a mini home on leased land, this section and section 10 will be struck out, please note. Okay, but we're not doing a mini home right now. So moving forward, you will of course have explained this entire document. So you're going to have to go in and tick that the seller has independent representation, and then you're going to fill us in. If you are the member of a team, you have to list at least one team member, and you have to list the team itself. And that is to make sure that the seller is advised that there could be other humans who suddenly jump into this transaction. That's why, and have access to the information. So you're going to determine your time to leave it open. We're only writing this now at 10:30 or 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. So I'm going to say, let's say 7 p.m. today. If I've spoken to the agent, we think that's a reasonable time. And so then the seller is going to give us one of three things. They're going to either accept this offer. It's the best thing they've ever seen since sliced bread. We have just been officially told to go jump in the harbor, or we're close, but we're going to tweak. Please make sure that in terms of best practices, you are explaining to your buyer that 7 p.m. is the time for which they can accept it. We could receive a counteroffer later, but the agent will tell us when to expect the counteroffer, so that you are not having clients at 7 o'clock having heart failure because now the counter is going to come at 9 p.m. The reason for that is because you cannot force a seller to compromise and sell or give up their largest financial item that they own because you have arbitrarily set a clock and you don't even agree to the terms. That's why you can have a counteroffer come later. Does everybody understand that? Okay.
Yes.
So you just have to hear that a counter offer is coming before 7.
Yes. So you need to be in communication with that seller's agent. Okay.
Yeah.
And going from there. But it's about how you prepare your buyer, because your buyer thinks that they're going to get the counter by 7, and you might get the counter by 7, but you might not, right? That seller might have to check something, or maybe you've asked closing date that they don't know if they can accommodate, and they have to check with their work to see if it's a posting. Like, there's a bunch of reasons that have nothing to do with not being willing or able to negotiate. They just can't give you an answer, right? And so sometimes that's why a counter has to go forward, and it's not even price. Sometimes it's closing date, someone who's got a military work posting or something like that, and they need to make sure with their command structure that they can make those things work, or check with the moving company or whatever before they sign on the dotted line and agree to those terms. So don't always think that just because you're getting a counter or there's a delay that, it's because everyone's going to be fighting to the death over price. It's not always that. Okay. So additional documents. Yes.
So you don't get a reply and you don't know there's a counter coming. When is that property open for, say, a backup offer?
Okay, well, it wouldn't be a backup offer if your offer dies on the table. If your offer was open until 7 and you haven't heard anything and there's no counter offer, it is open between 7 and the time a counter is prepared for another offer to slide in and for you to be in competition. It would be considered poor etiquette and poor practice under the fiduciary duties of the seller to simply ignore you. You should be hearing something by then. And if you haven't heard by 7, then you are becoming an official stalker hunting down that agent.
Okay.
And this is where, if you run into communication challenges, like if you've got an offer that was left open until 7 and you are not hearing back from that other agent, what do you do?
Well, you call the other agent, obviously. Say,
No, but let's say you call the other agent and they're not answering you. And it's like 6:30, 7 o'clock, 7:30, you've heard nothing. It's crickets. What do you now do?
Send an email saying it's now going to be open for other offers.
No, you're the buyer's agent. Why would you do that?
Oh yeah, true. Yeah.
So you're a buyer's agent and you are being ignored by the other side. What do you now do?
You let your buyer know that you haven't heard. But
Mike wins the prize.
Oh, your
Call
broker.
and have them call the other broker. This is where, and
okay.
Kelly, my apologies, Kelly, I missed you. This is absolutely what you do. You call us and we will get on the phone, and I can tell you, you'll get a flippant answer. Okay. So this is where you need to call us. You do not put yourselves into contractual limbo because you're worried about offending, and you call a broker. You have an offer in play and they're not talking to you, you call your broker. Call one of us. Okay. So additional documents and timing. This is where, if we're looking at web forms and we go back to the beginning of the offer, there are all these other documents that could potentially be applied to an agreement. I am not going to go through each one of these forms with you at this moment. I will tell you that the most commonly used one is your water and septic, or your resale condominium would be your 2 most common documents that we would see. And the dates that you put for the buyer conditions on those forms, what date do you think I would like them to match?
the last date, the 14th, the lawyer review and everything.
Correct. So what I want you to get as a best practice from this is there are only 2 dates in this entire agreement that you need to pay attention to. The beginning date where you are exchanging documents and money with the other side, and then one other date. All of your other dates are that one date. Water tests, septic testing, inspections, everything. Everything is one date. You can finish those things earlier and tick them off, but then you have one date. When you receive transactions as a seller's agent from a buyer who's got 13 different blinking dates in here, you need to counter that and tidy that up, because you will lose track. It is really, really difficult to keep track of offers when you have a whole bunch of weird dates. Your clients are confused. It's just so much easier to say, this is our day. It is a best practice from risk management, okay? So submitting the offer, how do you communicate with a seller's agent? This is where I will sound a bit old school. You need to also pick up your phone other than to just text people. Your ability to negotiate will be increased if you actually have a phone conversation with the other agent. Now, I also understand there are some agents who are hesitant to actually speak back on the phone, and that's another entirely different conversation. But I do recommend that you pick up the phone, have a phone conversation, then you're like, okay, great, I've told them I'm sending an offer. Then maybe you send a text message to say, just to let you know, I've just shared the offer with you, please confirm receipt. If you've sent it by email or if we've sent it by an e-signature program, you're gonna be able to see in your e-signature program that they've seen it or viewed it or opened it or whatever. But having that verbal communication from the beginning is a very important step to your ability to communicate and actually negotiate on behalf of your consumer. And so yes, physically, how do you submit the offer? You can send it any way you want. You can fax it. I don't know anybody that faxes anymore, but you could do that. Email it, scan it, share it through DocuSign, send it through Dotloop, drop it off. I don't know. That's important. One other thing that I actually don't have in here, and I'm just going to add in here, is you do need to, instructions and communication from your client. Please make sure that you are keeping notes. It's very, very important as an agent that you are keeping notes, whether you're doing it in a database, whether you're doing it in a pad of paper, whether you're doing it in a diary type book, in your calendar, I don't care. But you really need to be keeping notes of your communication with your client and the instructions that you are receiving. Because if everything goes great, it's perfect. But if everything goes bad and you don't have any notes, it's a problem, because it's going to be you that is going to be in trouble because you can't prove anything that you've done or said. If you're receiving very specific, very complicated, or slightly out of the ordinary instructions from your client, you would ask them to send them to you in an email. If it's something really weird, like, please disclose to them that we are moving and that we are a young family and that we want this or that. Okay, that's a lot of personal information. You want an instruction in writing for those types of things from your client, okay? And it is important that your clients receive true copies of all documents. This is one of the biggest failings of all realtors. It's just we just get really lazy with it. And it's important to understand that an electronic copy is a true copy. However, if you're using an electronic signature program and you're thinking that your clients by default have true copies, you need to make sure that they have registered for the free account in order to actually have continued access to them, because otherwise they don't log in, they don't have anywhere to see them. And so the other option is to email them to them after they're signed, you can create a shared Google Drive folder or whatever type of document sharing program you want to use. But you do want to make sure that your clients at all times have copies of all of their documentation. And so you want them to set up that free account with Dotloop or DocuSign. If you're doing that, if you're doing something by where you're printing and scanning or emailing, then you would send your client a copy in PDF so that they have it. Or again, set up some sort of shared Google Drive folder to make sure your clients have it. So that is really sort of the gist of what I wanted to go through. Oh my goodness, we're right on time, about 5 minutes over. I wanted to make sure I had time for questions. Of course, there's, I could talk for 5 hours on offers and strategies and minutia of particular deals. This was meant to be sort of a overview, a high level idea on best practices and things that you always want to include in chattels, and how do you deal with your dates, because those are the simple things that cause the most problems for people on their transactions. So I'm going to open it up to any additional questions. If there's something that you wanted to talk about that I haven't covered, I would welcome Tammy's input if there's something that you see as a managing associate broker, Tammy, that you would like me to have covered.
No, I can't think of anything. Honestly, it's been pretty straightforward.
Okay, great.
You have a
Anybody else have any?
You do
Go
have a
ahead.
question in the chat that I'm not sure if it was answered. Kelly had asked, if you're paying cash, do you still need to ask for insurance?
Yes, you do, because if, what just happened? What just happened? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I don't know what my Zoom, or it's decided to sign me out of Google Documents for some reason. I thought, oh my God, did I get signed out of the Zoom? So if you are paying cash, you still want to ask for insurance. Because if not, that client, sometimes a property is just not insurable. There's a problem with the electrical, there's a problem with certain, environmental aspects. It could have had an oil spill that they don't consider properly remediated. There's a whole pile of things. What I would say is, just from, if somebody said, no, I'm paying cash and I'm fine without insurance, because remember, you're all going to be completing your Keller Williams inspection waivers under the other. That's where that clause would go, Kelly, is you would add insurability, and that client was advised that they are supposed to be verifying their insurance and they've chosen not to. That would be something you would add under that other category of the waiver.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, and so for the other question with respect to a record of this, Erin will have it recorded and she will share it. Typically they all go on Weebly, I think, but Erin would be the person. She will send it out and or tell you where it is. I am happy to say I have nothing to do with the practical of what happens to this after I've done it. So that's great. Any other questions?
So regarding those dates, so if say the offer is accepted by the seller, and the closing day is like far away, and so during that period the buyer wanna get into the house again, is that normal to like
It depends. Yeah, it depends, Iris. That's a great question. If you have someone, let's say they're buying a property as a rental property and they want to be able to like bring buyers through or set up interviews or tenants through, like, so those are the specific scenarios where you would reach out to us before you drafted it. If some people build in a clause that says that the seller will allow the buyer to view the property, at least one more time prior to closing, at a mutually agreed upon time, basically saying, you have to let us in one more time. Usually it's because people want to measure or do something, and go from there and have that right. But generally speaking, it's not usually necessary to write it in unless you are having an incredibly difficult conversation with the other agent and there's a feeling that you're going to have problems getting in, or it's tenant occupied or something like that. Generally speaking, most people will let people in once or twice, just out of courtesy to let them in. They don't want them in there for 2 hours, but if you needed to, go in and measure something or do something, most people are pretty good about it. But again, if it's something that you're very concerned about, then I would recommend that we build a specific clause based on the specific scenario. And that's what I want to make sure, if there's anything that I leave you guys with today, it's that what we were showing you is the sort of everyday average, completely normal vanilla scenario of, completely normal house and completely normal seller and completely normal buyer. Of course, that's not always the case. And there's always going to be some specifics that you will need help with. And so when you're first starting, you are always welcome and you're welcome at any time actually to reach out to us. We can take a peek at your offers for you and give you some suggestions, tweak them. You've got a weird scenario, call one of the brokers and we will help you create the specific clause that is appropriate to help you and your client in that very particular situation, right? We can't pre-plan every scenario, but between us as a broker team, we can usually figure out the answer to give you some guidance. So that's what I would suggest. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. if anyone else has anything else. Otherwise, I'm going to thank you all so much for taking time on your Thursday morning to join me, and Erin will share this course with you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. It actually looks a little bit less like winter. I know Cape Breton, you're still buried deep in snow, but for the rest of the province, I think we're mostly snow free. I think you got all of it, Marianne, in beautiful Cape Breton.
Thanks.
And for everybody, have a lovely, lovely day. Stay safe. And if there's anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.